Donald Trump woke up to what may be one of the most politically difficult Saturdays of recent weeks. Questions are mounting inside Washington. Republican disagreements are becoming more public. International crises continue to dominate headlines. And critics argue that the pressure surrounding the White House is building from multiple directions at once. Tonight, we're breaking down everything that happened, from Trump's latest clash with members of his own party to growing concerns over U.S. military readiness to escalating tensions overseas and why analysts say these developments could shape the weeks ahead. Let's get into it. 035 bar Introduction. Politics rarely changes because of one headline. Instead, major political moments usually happen when several stories begin colliding at the same time. That's exactly what unfolded today. While President Trump focused attention on personnel fights in Washington, several other developments, from Congress to international security, created an unusually complicated news cycle. Whether these stories become temporary setbacks or longer-term political problems remains to be seen. Here's everything you need to know. As Saturday unfolded, one story quickly dominated the political conversation inside Washington. President Trump publicly turned his frustration toward members of his own party. Instead of focusing his criticism on Democrats, Trump used his social media platform to pressure Republican senators over one of his key administration priorities, confirming Todd Blanche for Attorney General. The message was unmistakable. Trump argued that if Republican senators refused to move forward with the nomination, he would consider keeping Blanche in an acting role while continuing to push for legislation that he says is necessary to address what he has repeatedly described as the weaponization of government. But here's where the story becomes politically significant. The disagreement wasn't coming from Democratic opposition. Instead, resistance was emerging from within the Republican Party itself. When internal disagreements spill into public view, they often reveal larger divisions that have been developing behind closed doors for weeks. And according to the transcript, Senator Thom Tillis responded by saying he considers Blanche qualified, but expressed concern about other legislative issues tied to the broader negotiations. That distinction matters. Supporting a nominee isn't necessarily the same as supporting every policy proposal surrounding that nomination. Political analysts often point out that these kinds of negotiations are common in Washington. Lawmakers frequently separate an individual's qualifications from broader legislative packages that may accompany major appointments. Still, Trump's public criticism highlights something larger. Throughout his political career, he has often preferred taking disagreements directly to the public rather than keeping negotiations private. Supporters argue that this approach creates pressure on lawmakers. Critics say it can make compromise more difficult. Either way, it guarantees attention. And on this Saturday, attention was exactly what the White House received. But while Washington debated confirmation politics, another development, thousands of miles away, was raising entirely different questions about America's role overseas. Those events would soon become just as important as the political battle unfolding on Capitol Hill. While Washington was consumed by political infighting, another story was unfolding that shifted attention from Capitol Hill to America's national security. According to the source transcript, discussion centered on reported warnings from senior U.S. military leadership regarding the availability of Navy destroyers and other missile defense resources amid ongoing tensions in the Middle East. If accurate, these concerns would reflect an operational challenge rather than a political one. Military commanders routinely assess whether available forces can meet multiple missions at the same time. When conflicts expand across different regions, difficult decisions often have to be made about where ships, aircraft, and defensive systems are deployed. The transcript also references reporting that missile defense systems, including interceptors used against ballistic missile threats, are under increasing demand because of ongoing regional conflicts. Whether those concerns ultimately require changes in U.S. strategy is a matter for defense officials and policymakers. But politically, the timing is significant. National security has always been one of Trump's strongest campaign themes. He has consistently argued that his administration prioritizes military strength and projects American power abroad. Supporters believe that approach deters adversaries and strengthens U.S. influence. Critics, however, argue that expanding commitments overseas can place additional strain on military resources. That broader debate has become increasingly important as instability continues across multiple regions simultaneously. And while officials in Washington evaluate military readiness, events on the water are creating another set of economic and security concerns. The transcript describes reports of commercial tankers being struck near the Strait of Hormuz, one of the world's most strategically important shipping routes. Any disruption in this area immediately attracts global attention because a significant share of the world's oil shipments passes through these waters. Even limited incidents can increase shipping costs, raise insurance premiums, and fuel concerns about global energy markets. The source further notes that some vessels were reportedly choosing longer routes to avoid higher risk areas, illustrating how geopolitical tensions can affect international trade. Whether these disruptions remain temporary or evolve into a broader crisis will depend on developments in the days ahead. For the White House, however, the political challenge is already becoming clear. At home, the administration is navigating disagreements with members of its own party. Abroad, international security issues continue demanding attention. And when domestic politics and foreign policy collide at the same time, presidents often find themselves facing pressure on multiple fronts. By Saturday afternoon, it wasn't just one headline creating problems for the administration. Instead, multiple stories were unfolding simultaneously, each competing for attention and adding another layer to an already complicated news cycle. Political strategists often say that presidents can usually manage one major controversy at a time. Two becomes difficult. Three or four at once can quickly dominate the national conversation. And that's what made this Saturday stand out. While Trump's dispute with Republican senators remained unresolved, international developments continued to generate fresh headlines. At the same time, questions about the administration's priorities became part of the political debate. The transcript argues that critics believe the administration is increasingly forced to respond to multiple issues at once, rather than controlling the narrative itself. Whether supporters agree with that assessment or not, there's little doubt that managing several high-profile stories simultaneously presents a communications challenge for any White House. Every presidential administration faces moments where attention is divided between domestic politics and international events. The real test is whether officials can reassure the public that they're staying focused on both. Meanwhile, overseas, new developments continued to reshape the conversation. The transcript discusses Russia's continued missile attacks on Ukraine and notes claims that Ukraine remains under pressure because of limited access to certain defensive missile systems. Those claims reflect one of the broader debates surrounding U.S. foreign policy. How much military support should America continue providing to allies? How quickly should that assistance be delivered? And how does Washington balance commitments in Europe while also responding to growing tensions in the Middle East? These aren't simple questions. They're strategic decisions with long-term consequences. Supporters of continued aid argue that helping allies strengthens international stability. Others believe resources should be focused more heavily on domestic priorities or that allies should shoulder a greater share of the burden. Regardless of where people stand politically, these debates are becoming increasingly central to American politics. Every decision carries financial, military, and diplomatic consequences. And because these discussions are happening during an already intense political season, every announcement receives even greater scrutiny. For the Trump administration, that means nearly every foreign policy decision is immediately analyzed through a political lens. Can the administration demonstrate strong leadership? Will Congress remain united? How will allies respond? And perhaps most importantly, how will American voters interpret these developments? As those questions continue circulating, another issue began drawing attention back inside the United States. The transcript shifts from foreign policy to immigration enforcement. describing protests and confrontations involving federal immigration officers in New York City. Immigration has long been one of Trump's defining political issues. Supporters argue that stronger enforcement is necessary to secure the border and uphold immigration laws. Critics argue that enforcement tactics can raise concerns about civil liberties and community relations. Those competing perspectives ensure that every enforcement operation quickly becomes part of the broader national political debate. As international developments continued to dominate headlines, attention quickly shifted back to the United States. This time, the focus wasn't on Congress or foreign policy, it was on immigration enforcement. According to the source transcript, demonstrations took place in New York City following encounters involving federal immigration officers, with protesters questioning enforcement actions and demanding greater accountability. Images from these events spread rapidly across social media, once again placing immigration at the center of the national conversation. For President Trump, immigration has always been more than just a policy issue. It's been one of the defining themes of his political career. From his first presidential campaign to today, border security and immigration enforcement have remained central pillars of his agenda. Supporters argue that strict enforcement is necessary to maintain public safety, uphold immigration laws, and secure America's borders. They see federal agencies carrying out their legal responsibilities and believe stronger enforcement deters illegal immigration. Critics, however, raise concerns about how enforcement operations are conducted, particularly when they occur in densely populated communities. They argue that transparency, due process, and community trust are essential components of effective law enforcement. These competing viewpoints help explain why immigration remains one of the most polarizing issues in American politics. Every operation, every protest, and every official statement quickly becomes part of a much larger political debate for the White House that creates both opportunities and risks. Supporters often view strong enforcement as evidence that campaign promises are being fulfilled. Opponents argue that the administration's approach can deepen political divisions. Regardless of perspective, one fact remains clear. Immigration continues to be one of the issues most capable of energizing both supporters and critics at the same time. And on this particular Saturday, it became yet another headline competing for national attention. When political strategists evaluate difficult news cycles, they rarely focus on just one story. Instead, they ask a broader question: who is controlling the national conversation? Throughout this Saturday, the administration faced simultaneous challenges: a public disagreement with Republican lawmakers, growing attention on international security, questions surrounding military readiness, continuing debate over U.S. foreign policy, and renewed controversy over immigration enforcement. Individually, each of these stories might have been manageable. Together, they created an unusually crowded news cycle. For any administration, moments like these require careful communication. Every public statement is analyzed, every social media post is scrutinized, every policy decision is interpreted through both a political and strategic lens. Supporters argue that President Trump has repeatedly demonstrated an ability to recover from difficult political moments. Throughout his career, he has often remained a dominant figure in the news, even during periods of intense criticism. Critics, on the other hand, believe that repeated controversies can gradually erode political momentum if they continue to accumulate. Which interpretation proves correct will depend largely on how events unfold over the coming days and weeks. For now, however, one thing is undeniable. Saturday delivered a series of developments that ensured the administration would remain under intense public scrutiny. And in modern politics, perception can be nearly as important as policy itself. Because once multiple stories begin reinforcing one another, regaining control of the narrative becomes significantly more difficult. As this extraordinary Saturday comes to a close, one thing is becoming increasingly clear. The challenges facing the Trump administration are no longer coming from just one direction. Instead, they're arriving all at once. Political disagreements inside Washington, ongoing debates over key appointments, growing international security concerns, questions surrounding America's role overseas, and renewed controversy over immigration enforcement. Each story on its own would be significant. Combined, they create one of the busiest political news cycles the administration has faced in recent weeks. Now, whether these developments become a lasting political problem or simply another chapter in America's fast-moving political landscape will depend on what happens next. Will Republican lawmakers and the White House find common ground? Will tensions overseas begin to ease or continue escalating? Can the administration shift the national conversation back toward its own priorities? Or will these controversies continue dominating headlines into next week? Those are the questions political observers across Washington will be watching closely. One thing history has consistently shown is that politics can change remarkably fast. Today's dominant headline can disappear tomorrow. But sometimes, a single weekend becomes the turning point that shapes everything that follows. Whether this Saturday ultimately proves to be one of those moments remains to be seen. For now, however, the pressure on the White House is unmistakable, and the coming days could prove critical. We'll continue following every major development as this story evolves. If you found this breakdown helpful, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next update. And now we'd like to hear from you. Do you think Saturday's events represent a temporary political setback for President Trump, or could they have longer-term consequences? Share your thoughts in the comments below, but as always, keep the discussion respectful and constructive. Thank you for watching. We'll see you in the next video.